So.
Okay, so the main topic we want to talk about this week, we want to talk about the Yola 3S's. So a lot of people have been asking,
Here we
what's
go
different?
again.
Do they hit harder or do they not hit hard? What's the deal? What is going on with these paddles? So we played with them last week, got them out, and we filmed a video, actually, that we were going to post last week. And then when I cut the paddles open, I couldn't figure out what was different. Like, it pretty much looked like the same paddle, maybe a smidge less foam. Then I was like, okay, I should just hit up Yola and just ask him, like, what did you guys change? Because I can't really tell.
Yeah.
This is going to be very interesting because I have a lot of thoughts about this whole thing. So basically, here's the deal, and this explains so much of the Gen 3s and I guess the mod, but the mod hasn't been around as long. So they obviously seem to core crush a lot, at least in our area. With big hitters, they crush all the time. I mean, this weekend, the mod, the guy at League, I literally heard his paddle from one court over. He must have hit a forehand drive, and I immediately went, well, whatever. I was like, that's either a gearbox or a Yola, and it is completely destroyed. Like it was like a loud gunshot.
Oh, trust me,
ear.
I had the same thought. I walked in and I heard it and immediately went, huh, where's that? Yeah. And I knew the second I heard it, I knew exactly what it was. And then when I looked at who it was, I went, I'm not surprised.
Oh, dude, when I heard the ball, I was like, I hope that didn't hit someone because they're dead if it hit them. I was so loud. So, okay. This is just so crazy to me. Okay. So basically, the 3S, here's what changed. It is the exact same paddle as the Gen 3 and the mod. Nothing changed except the core is not crushed. So basically, what Yola was doing and how they explained it to me is with the Gen 3 and the mod, they were taking a thicker core and putting it, so with thermoforming, a paddle goes into a mold, and this is why paddles get core crushed.
Yep.
If the mold is like pushed in wrong and the pressure's off, or the core is too thick inside the mold, there's a lot of pressure inside this mold.
Let's just say the mold is exactly 16 millimeters, and then if they put a core sheet inside that is 16 and a half millimeters or 17
or
millimeters
some number,
or just some number above 16, when that press goes down and molds it, it is actually going to break and core crush the paddle from the factory as it's being made. And that's why when you get it, it won't make a crunching noise right away, but it is broken the second you get it.
And this is how basically thermoform paddles have worked. So like, I feel like from when we, like all the way back in the Carbon 1X days, people didn't really know what was going on.
Yep.
People thought it was like not enough glue. People thought it was real delamination. There was a little bit of that, but there was a lot of theories of like, what is going on? The common working knowledge right now is that when a paddle is core crushed, or when they core crush a lot, they're already broken from the factory. I've cut open so many paddles now, and I have seen so many paddles where the core is broken and the paddle's only been hit a couple times.
Yep.
And I know it wasn't from the few dinks that were hit on the paddle.
Yeah.
So if it's going to core crush, it was broken from the factory. So anyways, Yola would take a thicker core, put it into the mold, and compress it.
And do that on purpose.
Yeah, that was on purpose.
That was intentional.
Yeah, that one wasn't an accident. I think there's still going to be some variants. Like sometimes there's just variants, for my understanding, with the polymer sheets, and they can crush a little bit. But this one was intentional.
Yeah.
So now an interesting question that I asked, because I just don't think anyone's really thought to ask this because we're so far past the situation. But I asked them, I was like, okay, clearly you've thought about this. And they explained to me, like, you know, basically the thought process behind when they went and did this. And I was like, okay, well, my question is, does the paddle, when you do that, still pass the deflection test? Not the PPL one. I'm just talking about USAP here because that was the standard these things were all built for.
Yep.
Because when all of the stuff happened back in the day, we'll start with the PPA. So they just banned the 1X when it was hitting super hard. Thomas Wilson was hitting absolute bombs. Everyone was like, what is going on?
Yep.
People were catching on to the whole lacrosse ball thing. They just banned the paddle and said, basically, if you use this and this thing fails, you know, we'll strip your winnings or whatever. And then eventually it just came back and people seemed to stop caring about it. And then this is kind of how like the whole PPL deflection test stuff started to happen, was because of these paddles. And then USAP never came out and said, hey, this fails a deflection test, to my knowledge. I can't remember that happening. And then they made a new test at the APP, which is like this ultrasonic bond test. Basically, it's a little scanner that goes over the face. And what's interesting is, to my knowledge of like how that works, is it's more looking for like DLAM, I feel like, than it is core crushing. But regardless, they do this little scan on the paddle. It's not a deflection test.
Right.
And so my question to them was, no one ever actually came out and said these failed deflection tests. So is it possible that this whole time core crushed paddles have been legal? They just hit harder than what people wanted. And when I asked them that, they said they have all the testing equipment. They run the tests themselves. And they said it does pass. So out of the box, when it is crushed like that, it will pass. Obviously, it's not making the noise with your hand yet. So that makes sense as it pass. So then my next question was, does it pass when you can start hearing a crunch? And they said, yes.
See, that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, here's the thing. They said it often does pass when you start hearing that crunch, but there does become a point where it's crunching too much and it will not pass anymore.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
at
because
league, that guy's paddle wasn't passing.
100%.
That one was, I'd pretty much bet money that one wasn't passing because that thing was destroyed.
I feel like most don't, because at least once you start to really hear it crunch,
Yes,
like when you
agree.
hear one crunch and someone else across like the group or somewhere over can go, oh wow, I heard that.
Yep.
Like, not only can you just feel your thumb sink in, you can just see the entire face move. And at that point, you know that, I mean, once you hear it crunch once, you know it's done. Like, I've had paddles where I'll push on it and it doesn't really necessarily move, but I hear a tiny little crack and I go, okay, I'm done using this. Because what's the point of trying to get used to a core crush paddle?
Yeah, 100%.
Like, even though it might still be legal, it's
well,
not
I think
worth
it's,
it to me.
becomes unpredictable. You know it's going to break, so what's the point?
Mid-game, it's going to get worse.
But I did think that was interesting. And what I'd like to know, I wish I could see the paddles be tested with my own eyes. I'd like to know what level of crunch still passes. Like, are we talking only the tiniest little bit of crunch that you can kind of hear? That passes, but as soon as you hear a full crunch, it doesn't. I mean, clearly that line is very blurred, and amateurs are never going to know when their paddle is too core crush. So like, I still think the general rule of thumb is if it makes that noise, you should probably just retire the paddle.
I agree.
But I just thought that was interesting because it's a question no one really asked. And so when I got that answer, I was like, okay, that feels like it checks out a bit.
Interesting.
But, and then, like I said, we're not even going to talk about the whole PPL testing. Test is completely different. So I just feel like it doesn't really apply. But yeah, I thought that was fascinating personally. And I told them this on the phone, like, I just think that was a flawed design. Like, okay, yes, you got the power that you wanted, but it comes at the expense of people will break these eventually. You might
It's guaranteed.
Well, we can't say guaranteed. You might get one that out of the factory didn't crush as much and you have like a grandma who's barely hitting hard. But if you, in my opinion, if you're a high level player, it's just bound to break. I don't know how you could not.
Yeah. It's
break
like
it.
buying a car from a manufacturer that says, hey, this engine, super powerful, really fast car, but it's gonna break after 10,000 miles.
Yeah, right.
It's like, okay, who's gonna buy that car? No one.
Yeah.
It's set up for failure.
Yeah, the concept to me of it, I feel like was just kind of bad. I feel like it wouldn't be great for the consumer. I feel like it kind of puts a paddle in the market that a lot of people still don't even know what core crushing is. Like, I mean, we hear it at the local courts occasionally, and like the people clearly have no idea that their paddle is broken. So I don't really feel like I like the idea of doing like putting a thicker core just to get some more power. Like, I feel like it is just inherently
Especially
flawed.
if you're already trying to gain power through using a foam system like they're doing.
What's interesting though is I'd like to know how much that foam is actually causing. So everyone up until this news, and this may change people's opinion because it obviously makes sense why it hit so hard if it was essentially core crushed.
Right.
The foam, I'd be curious to know how much weight that's pulling in terms of power, because we've now seen several other foam cores that they hit hard, but not that hard. So one of them, I don't know if you actually got to hit it, but I hit it when Will was here. But that Ace Heart, it has the same type of foam design. I think the foam inside might be a little different, which could contribute. But that thing is kind of just like a Gen 2.
Yeah.
Like it was a fine paddle, but it wasn't like ultra juiced power. So I'd like to know how much that foam is actually doing the work. To me, now that I am aware of what the issue is, it's like, oh, okay, well, of course it hit hard.
Yeah.
It was core crushed.
Right. No, it makes 100% sense. My one thing I'm curious about, now we've hit the 3S's, if, obviously we don't know if they're not core crushed, but let's just say they're not core crushed. And
Talking about the 3S?
The 3S. And they're the exact same design as the Gen 3. Mm-hmm. Yes, they still, like, they're not insane like the Gen 3s, but they're still power paddles.
Yeah, 100%.
So they're still hitting harder than pretty much any Gen 2.
Yeah.
And if it's not core crush, then obviously the foam is doing something in terms of power. Obviously,
Sure.
like, I didn't get to hit that Ace Heart paddle, but other foam core paddles like the Olympus obviously don't hit anywhere near as hard as that. So it's a toss-up for me right now, foam core.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's still contributing, but I think before people just thought that was like the whole main thing. And now that that's stripped away, I'm like, okay, maybe it's adding, but it maybe not wasn't the sole reason it was so juiced.
Oh, totally. And this makes so much more sense for me because it's so interesting when you hit the Gen 3s side by side with the 3S. If they're the exact same design, the Gen 3s, when you hit them, were so... The sound was muted and more thunky. Mm-hmm. And now the 3S is much more tingy, which makes so much sense because any core crush paddle, let's take a 1X for example, the sound changes drastically.
Yeah.
Obviously, we all know this once it core crushes and starts to make that more thunky thud sound.
Yep.
And so it just makes way more sense.
No,
now.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It still kind of has that sound a little bit, but it's definitely less than what it used to be.
It also makes sense of why they felt squishier because they were core crushed. Like,
what are you talking squishy at the edge, or are you talking, because the centers I never really felt like were squishy, but the edges obviously were where the foam was.
I felt in the center it was much more plush feeling and springy, which is what.
Oh wait, you're not talking about physical compression. You're talking about like when you're hitting the ball.
Yeah,
like
when you're
not
hitting,
putting your hand
when you're hitting the ball.
Oh, okay,
when you're hitting
yes.
the ball with the paddle,
yes,
it felt much more loose and springy. Where the 3S's now feel stiffer and tighter.
Yes.
Which just, again, all of this makes more sense if they were essentially already core crushed.
Yeah. So let's talk about the 3S and like how it played.
Yeah.
So we've already talked about it a little bit here, but like, yes, it's still a power paddle, but I don't really know if people will complain about them anymore.
I don't hate it. I'm not like against it at all.
I feel like it's pretty in line with most power paddles now. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would be much more scared of the gearbox than I would the 3S now.
Oh, totally.
Or even like the Ripple last night. Like I was way more scared of that. And when I would hit a Gen 3 side by side, I brought like a Perseus Gen 3 and then had the 3S, and then I did the same with the Scorpius. And like you said a minute ago, the best word you can use with the mods and the Gen 3s is that they just felt like loose. Mm-hmm. And then when you hit a 3S, everything feels like tight or more rigid. Like,
yeah.
When I go to hit a speed up or I hit a drive on the Gen 3s, it just feels effortless. Like I barely have to do anything and I just get an absolute cannon out of it.
It feels like you have strings on a tennis racket.
Yeah, it's just
it
boom.
Launches the ball.
And now without that, I'm like, I still have to do a lot of work with my body to get power out of it. Yes, it's still a power paddle, but I didn't feel like I could drive someone off the court. With the Gen 3s, I feel like I could drive someone off the court. Mm-hmm. So yes, still hits hard, but I think you have to put a lot more effort in to get it. And it's like, my thought right now is if you were going to complain about a 3S, then I feel like you have to complain about a Paddle Tech and like
obviously
any other power
gearbox.
paddle. Yeah, a gearbox, like any other power paddle you have to complain about.
I don't mind the Paddle Techs power-wise, and I put the 3S right around there. So I have currently, until we play against other people with 3S's more, I'm okay with where they stand in the power rankings. Like, it's not unbelievably, too much.
Yeah. I think the thing that we're all going to have to wait and see is, so yes, the core is now not intentionally crushed to generate power out of the box, but the thing that I'm really curious about is it's still a Gen 2, and we still know that Gen 2s can core crush.
Yes.
So basically now, instead of it being intentional, it just comes down to how tight is the QC on the actual mold. So my guess is we're going to see significantly less than what we saw before. But how high is that number still going to be?
Eventually, you'll still see them. Like, I feel like no matter what, if you're someone who hits hard and plays a lot, any Gen 2 paddle eventually will core crush.
Yeah,
that is inevitable.
That seems to be for higher level players the case, for sure.
Yeah.
So
it's just a matter of time.
I hope it is tightened up and that we don't, because like, you know, if the 3S exactly how it is right now is in the market, I'm not going to complain.
Yeah.
I don't think most people would probably complain.
Right.
So yeah,
that just comes down to if you want to use a UPA approved paddle versus USAP.
Well, exactly. Now that there's that whole other debate, like you can't use it in certain tournaments, and it's like, okay, I still think it's a really good paddle, but is it $280 good? And I'm restricted in what tournament.
People have already been throwing around. I've been hearing some other people joke around when people have a 3S in their hands. I was with some friends and someone had one and someone made a joke and was like, "Oh, so you're never playing APPs, huh?" So the jokes are already going around about the UPA approved paddle. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah. So that I think is going to be a big question on like, well, is it worth it now when you do have other power paddles that are pretty solid and it's, you know, currently legal everywhere?
Right.
So I don't know. I guess the other thing I will say overall with the 3S, and it makes sense because core crush paddles are unpredictable, but 3S way more predictable, and it was way, 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 way easier for me to drop with.
Oh, yeah.
I struggled with the 16 Gen 3s before. Like, everything just felt so hard to drop with for me. 3S, I felt right at home. I didn't have any issue.
It's so funny because I still feel like it was easier for me to drop with the Gen 3s.
Yeah, but you seem to have a thing where you just don't want to do anything. I'm convinced you just don't like swinging your paddle.
I like my drops. I like to just scoop it, and I like to just barely move my hand and let the ball, like the ripple. Oh, my drops with the ripple, fantastic. But why would you ever drop with the ripple?
I mean, yeah. Why would you ever drop with a Gen 3 back in the day either? You wouldn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think I have too much else on the 3S. But yeah, I mean, that's what's different from 3S, guys. Basically, core is fully intact as it should be.
But otherwise, that's why the design is all the same. When we first cut it open, and we were all like, "What the heck? Why is it the exact same?"
Yeah,
because it literally is.
I do wish like it's such a weird thing because I feel like I see both sides of this story, right? So if Yola did all their testing and they saw, okay, this passes when we do this, and it passes up to a certain point of use, it's like, okay, well, you're not breaking a rule, but you're also putting something out that you like know is gonna break more than likely.
But also, if you know that the market is trained to see that as a unusable, broken product, why still intentionally make it that way?
Well, but then couldn't you say that about every Gen 2? Because like we said earlier, you know they're inevitably going to core crush, so maybe every Gen 2 company is just as guilty.
I guess. Yeah, you could look at it that way. That makes sense.
Because, like, I mean, if we looked at basically any thermoform paddle, like, yeah, we hear it happen to people all the time. So I guess it's
just a matter of how much mileage the company wants you to get out of it.
Well, it's, I guess, how much mileage, and I guess maybe it was the intent. Like, you know, I feel like I would think a lot of the companies aren't doing that on purpose. I guess I don't know.
Right.
Just based on how long some of them last, I'm getting the hunch that most of the time it's not intentional. But I feel like that is an interesting thing to think about. It's like, okay, well, yeah, if you are mad at Yola, then why are we not mad at everyone else? Because they don't last forever.
Right.
And heavy hitters complain about breaking them.
It's just less intentional from other companies.
Yeah.
Like,
but then you also don't know their intent either, right? Like maybe there are companies doing this and we just don't know about it.
I guess, yeah, that's true. We don't know because we haven't talked to them. So,
it's also sometimes, for example, like, do they even know? Like sometimes, obviously there are companies that are more involved with their factories and they keep closer tabs on them, but there are also a lot of companies that don't really know what their factory is doing. Totally. So could their factory just say, oh, we ran out of 16 millimeter cores. Let's just put this thicker one in here, and they won't know. It's not broken out of the box, like it doesn't crunch. So then they just don't know. Does that happen? Maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of questions.
It's such a weird, thing to think about, and Yes, interesting. Gen 2 paddles, man. We should just go back to Gen 1 or give everyone a wood paddle, man. Let's just go back to wood paddles.
Look, let's not make pickleball terrible. Come on. Let's not ruin pickleball.
What if we all go back to the Franklin signature?
That OG one?
Yeah.
Fiberglass paint grit one?
Everyone goes back to Franklin signature. That's what you get to use.
Do you think Ben is just the immediate winner of that tournament if they did a pro tournament with only that paddle? Or would it be someone else? Because I feel like anyone like Kwong, I don't think he's going to be able to spin the ball.
Kwong's out.
Anyone who's hitting like semi-Western, you're probably just out.
Yeah, those Riley's out. Well, no, Riley, I think because he used that Gamma paddle, he'd be fine.
No spin.
He'd be totally fine with it. I don't know. There would be a lot of players who just would be automatically.
Yeah.
Connor Garnett, out of the tournament. Yeah, you give him one of those, I'm sorry, but he's never making a finals again. That would be such an interesting. I honestly would love to see a tournament where every player has to use the same paddle. That would be so interesting. Obviously, it would never be a PPA.
Yeah.
It'd be cool if there was like a privately held tournament.
Just give us like 3 tournaments and just see if the results are different.
Yeah, I mean, so back in my bowling career, that was a thing where every competitor had to use the same ball. Then it was honestly some of the most fun tournaments I've ever competed in.
Sure.
I would love to see that in pickleball. Even just like for a local tournament.
Yeah.
Everyone, like, the registration is, a little bit lower and everyone just has to buy this cheap paddle.
I want to see a trainer paddle tournament.
Oh, that would be so much fun. That would be awesome. There's so many cool ideas for these. Like, I'd love to. I should set something like that up. That'd be fun. Or even just like a rec group where everyone has to use the same old junky paddle.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all we have on the Yola 3S. We will keep you updated on if we hear any core crushing or anything else. But I mean, should just be in line with about everything that's on that back wall right there now. So,
and hopefully this is the fourth and last time we have to talk about this paddle.
Yeah. I feel like I am getting deja vu. I feel like it was like Gen 3, Mod, 3S, and it's like, okay.
Alpha.
Alpha.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm
There's literally been
around.
4 versions of this thing. It's ridiculous.